Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
Breaking news, the Chicago Bears are solely focused on Arlington Heights for their new stadium project. Is it really breaking, though? We've kind of known that for months. But for whatever reason, Bears President Kevin Warren and Chairman George McCaskey called a press conference on Friday to spill the beans. Shovels are ready to go as soon as Springfield comes in with some help this fall. Specifically, the Bears are looking for lawmakers to pass legislation that would give mega projects like theirs the ability to negotiate their property taxes with the municipality for up to 40 years. Now, that has the prospect of saving the Bears some real money in the long run, and Warren insists they can't go forward without it.
All we need is property tax certainty, and we're not trying to avoid paying taxes. We absolutely will pay taxes, but we want to just have certainty. And what this mega project property tax bill allows you to do is it allows a company like the Bears to negotiate with local taxing authorities, school boards, school districts, to be able to set the certain amount of taxes that should be paid. And this is what we call no cost and no obligation. This costs the state of Illinois zero.
Now, this same bill stalled in the spring legislative session because it didn't have the votes to move forward. So now Warren's play is wait until the fall session when the rules change. It now requires a 3/5 majority to get anything passed. That means they need to find around 11 more House members and 6 more senators. State Representative Cam Buckner tells us Warren's political strategy right now looks a bit like former head coach Matt Eberflus's end-of-game strategy.
This is not something that is on our priority list. When you look at what's going on with the state's financial situation, when you look at the fact that in Washington, Trump is already talking about cutting Medicaid and housing programs and other things that actually keep our communities afloat. When you talk about the fact that we need $1.5 billion for the transit system here in the region, we are not spending much time talking about where the Bears should be playing football and whether or not the state of Illinois should be writing a check to them.
And the governor had this to say today.
I do not think that the taxpayers of the state of Illinois should be propping up what now is an $8.5 billion valued business. They seem to be doing okay for themselves.
The bottom line, the Bears somehow have to get dozens of House and Senate members from Chicago to approve legislation that gives the Bears tax relief to leave the city for Arlington Heights. To use a football analogy, it would be like tossing a wobbly pass into triple coverage. Governor Pritzker, who wants to run for president, would have to sign that legislation that gives that $8.5 billion organization a tax break. You can see the attack ads now. Short of giving all these lawmakers season tickets and a night out with Brian Urlacher and Mike Singletary, I don't know what the Bears have up their sleeves to get this done. I do know the clock is ticking, and according to state lawmakers, the Bears have yet to move the political football.
Coming up on Paris on Politics.
President Trump federalizes the National Guard to fight crime in D.C. and warns Chicago could be next. But the law might not be on his side. An aquatic event 98 years in the making. Why up to 500 swimmers will dive into the Chicago River for the first time in nearly a century. And the Chicago Humanities Fest brings in some of the biggest names in the literary world. We preview who's on tap this fall.
This is Paris on Politics from Fox 32 Chicago.
Welcome to Paris on Politics, where we go behind the headlines and beyond the spin. President Trump has called up the National Guard to take over policing in the nation's capital, and it's getting a fair amount of pushback. Now he says cities like Chicago could be next, even though violent crime rates have steadily decreased since 2020. Can the president legally send National Guard troops to Chicago streets?
If we need to, we're going to do the same thing in Chicago, which is a disaster. We have a mayor there who's totally incompetent.
Tough talk from President Trump, but can he legally follow through with threats to deploy the National Guard on Chicago streets to help fight violence? Governor Pritzker says the law is clear. He cannot.
The federal government does not have a right to send soldiers into American cities for the purpose of, well, for any purpose really, but specifically to fight crime, let's say. And that is what he's suggesting that he will do, violate that law.
Federal law states the governor must request the National Guard. D.C. is different because it's not a state. The Guard was last called to assist Chicago police in 2021 after the killing of Adam Toledo. Typically, National Guard personnel protect infrastructure or assist in blocking traffic during large-scale protests or riots. D.C.'s violent crime rate is currently at a 30-year low. Chicago's murder rate is trending 33% lower than a recent peak in 2020. Senator Dick Durbin says for those reasons, the president is purely motivated by politics.
He always mentions Chicago in his litany of cities. What a coincidence that they all happen to be in blue states. That's where he focuses his political attention.
Trump wasted no opportunity to insult Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker as well, who has not ruled out a run for his job in 2028.
We have an incompetent governor there. Pritzker's an incompetent. His family threw him out of the business, and he ran for governor. And now I understand he wants to be president. But I noticed he lost a little weight, so maybe he has a chance. You know, you never know what happens.
For his part, Pritzker thanked Trump for the, quote, compliment, but says he rejects the criticism.
I reject criticism and don't really want to respond to criticism from Donald Trump, who inherited his money and then went bankrupt 6 times and then defrauded his business partners. And by the way, he cheats at golf.
And this afternoon, Mayor Johnson weighed in saying if President Trump wants to help make Chicago safer, he can start by releasing the funds for anti-violence programs that have been critical to our work to drive down crime and violence. Sending the National Guard would only serve to destabilize our city and undermine public safety efforts. And earlier this evening, I spoke via Zoom with Illinois Attorney General Kwame Raoul and asked him if there is any law that allows the president to federalize the National Guard to act as police.
The first question for you, under federal law and under state law, can the president call the National Guard to Chicago without the governor requesting it?
Well, no, and this is something that's being litigated in California, but there's a federal act called Posse Comitatus Act that lays out the conditions in which the president can call the National Guard. One is if there's a foreign rebellion, 2, foreign invasion rather, 2, whether there's a need to suppress a rebellion, and 3 is to execute a federal law that he otherwise cannot execute without the assistance of military forces.
And so to call the National Guard to help fight violent crime, it would seem to not satisfy any of those conditions, would it?
No, it would not. It would not. You know, local law enforcement is specially trained to deal with the day-to-day issues that are experienced in cities and counties. And local law enforcement knows the ins and outs of neighborhoods and communities better than a military force that's not trained to deal with these challenges nor familiar with neighborhoods and communities. Now, that said, my office, the Chicago Police Department, other local law enforcement agencies collaborate on the regular with federal law enforcement agencies, whether it's the FBI, the ATF, the DEA, and Secret Service and other agencies. And we are happy to continue doing so. We do so on a week-to-week, month-to-month basis, and we have great collaboration with federal law enforcement. And I think that should be the president's focus, making certain that he's not pulling away law enforcement officers from those federal agencies into doing other things such as immigration enforcement. Those people are specially trained to deal with certain types of crime, and we should not be taking those resources away from law enforcement.
And as you know, it's being litigated in California because the president did send in the military and National Guard there without getting the governor's request. If the president does something like that here, despite the Posse Comitatus Act, what happens next from a legal standpoint?
Likely we would bring action, you know, to the extent that there's not collaboration between the governor and the president on calling in the National Guard. To the extent that there's nobody that's invaded the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois from a foreign nation, or there's not a rebellion going on within the state of Illinois, then there's no reason or some other need to execute federal law. There'd be no reason for the president to do that, and so we would have to intervene by way of a lawsuit.
Say the governor were to call the National Guard. You mentioned the National Guard's trained to do certain things. They can't act as police officers. Can having National Guard presence actually help with crime fighting, or could it hinder it?
I suppose it depends on a circumstance. A lot of crime fighting relies on familiarity. Familiarity with neighborhoods, familiarity with bad actors, familiarity with good actors that collaborate with police departments. And when you call in the National Guard, which is comprised of people coming from perhaps different parts of the state who may not be familiar with certain neighborhoods and certain patterns of crime, it could be more disruptive than it can be helpful.
And when we come back, some of the country's literary giants are headed here to Chicago. We give you the skinny on the long-running Humanities Fest.